Okay, before we get into pitch notation, we have to talk about one more thing that's dealing with the rhythm notation, and I mentioned this in the previous video. This is a hard concept. Don't introduce this until you get into third grade or later. But time signature deals with the meter. So these are kind of synonymous, maybe not completely, but mostly synonymous, time signature and meter. And we've already talked about meter, and we've done some conducting and other things. Here's what happens. If I have a staff, whether it's a rhythm staff or a pitch staff, at the beginning of this staff, almost always you'll see two numbers. Or sometimes it might look something like this with a C. Okay? This is the time signature, and it's always the second thing, we'll talk about the first thing, that you see on the staff. Actually, sometimes it's the third thing. But on a rhythm staff, it's always the first thing because that's the only thing that matters to us. We don't have the other things that are clefs and key signatures. So, our two numbers, each one of them has a significance or a term that's involved with it. So the top number tells us the number of beats in each measure. And also the top number basically tells us our meter. Excuse me. So this is the most important one because that tells us what we're going to count to. If we're going to clap and count rhythms, that's the number that's going to tell us that. If we're conducting, it tells us what conducting pattern we're going to use. Now, I taught you with the meters that we only use duple meter and triple meter. So if you look at this and say, okay, we have a 4 on top, we didn't talk about quadruple meter. Well, yes, there is quadruple meter, there are quadruple conducting patterns, but I didn't get into that too much. So just know that this is a multiple of 2, and if you want to, you can still just conduct with your duple meter pattern, but you can't count to 2 and make this work. You got to count to 4 when you're counting rhythms. The bottom number here tells us which note or note value gets the beat. So the first one's pretty easy. That's understandable. The number of beats in the measure, the meter. But this one's a little tricky. So which note gets the beat? And that's referring to our whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, etc. So which one of these notes is going to have the beat? Now, this is where it really starts to get technical and challenging for students, and this is why we don't deal with this too much in younger grades, because meters of 2, meters of 3, and meters of 4 is plenty sufficient for them to be challenged in kindergarten, first and second grades. But as you get into third grades, fourth grades, you can start delving into more complex time signatures. So here's what I do, and this is again a little more technical, so you're not teaching this to kindergartners, but I'll take the bottom number and I'll make a fraction, and for the numerator I'm just going to put a 1, and you'll notice that this right here is equal to one of these 4. Okay, which happens to be our quarter note. So that means if I have a time signature of 4/4, that means that a quarter note gets the beat. Okay, and everything that I taught you in that last video about rhythm notation is based on 4/4 time. This is when a whole note gets 4 beats, a half note gets 2 beats, and a quarter note gets 1 beat. If I change this all of a sudden, and I made this 2/2, now all of a sudden everything I taught you in that last video is not correct anymore. So rhythm values are relative, okay? They're not exact, they are relative, they can change. So here's what happens. Now all of a sudden I have 2 beats in my measures, and I'm in a meter of 2, and I've changed the type of note that's going to get the beat. So I put in my denominator here that number, and now instead of a quarter note getting the beat, a half note gets the beat. So now all of a sudden the music is going twice as fast as it was when I was in 4/4. This is a common time signature. The most common ones that you will see in music are 2/4, 2 beats to the measure, quarter note gets the beat. 3/4, 3 beats to the measure, quarter note gets the beat. And the one that I already showed you, 4/4, this being the most common, and for that reason we have another symbol that we use, this C right here, which is called common time. Because it's the most used time signature, we can just use that because composers are lazy. They don't want to write 2/4s, it's easier just to write a C. So this and this are equal, okay? Let's do another one which is quite common. 6/8. And this is a compound meter, very challenging for students. 6 beats to the measure, meter of 6. So you'd use a conducting pattern of 6. Or if it's going fast enough, you could just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and do a 2 with 3 things happening in each 2. Okay? And if we put the 8 on the bottom as our denominator and a 1 on top, you'll notice that now the 8th note is getting the beat. So that bottom number changes a lot. The top number not so much, but the bottom number completely changes how the music feels. So hopefully you can kind of understand that, and when you look at a piece of music in a book or a song book, you can look at the time signature and say, okay, that's a meter of 3 or that's a meter of 2, this is how I would conduct it, this is how it's going to feel, and time signatures are important, so take some time to understand that and notice those as we go through music in future parts of this class.